Okay, welcome everyone. Welcome to my channel, New Directions in Leadership. And this is our another episode of Intertwines. We talk about different historical periods and also most important incidents or events happen in these specific time periods and their impacts on leadership practices and mindset. Some of them are still affecting how we practice leadership in our days, also different mindset about leadership. And I am here with my husband, Ted Kohn, and we will talk about ancient China today. And we were supposed to have an episode yesterday, but we couldn't do it because of the health reasons. But we are trying to catch up, and thank you for watching us. And again, if you have any ideas, if you have your specific incidents or events about this, like different time periods, just share with us so we can also talk about those. Until then, we picked our specific events which affected leadership practices and mindset. But the tricky part, we don't share it even to each other. So when we start talking about it, we just learn from each other. And by that way, our conversation is more natural. And I hope you do, but I am learning a lot from a historian perspective. So I hope you are learning from a leadership perspective.
Learning a lot. Yes.
Yeah, good. Good for your health. Yeah. Okay. So today we will do something different. Usually we start talking about the history and the brief overview of the historical time period. But since today's topic is related to ancient China, I just want to do something different. Let's start talking about current or modern China, and because of their production and their investment in Africa, right?
Mhm.
All the mines and everything. And suddenly China became one of the most strongest economies in the world. So why do you think it's happening, and how this development affects rest of the world?
Yeah, I mean, I think we see something that we've never seen before. So it's not just that it's a billion people, because, in the earlier times, even during World War II, it really wasn't that strong of an economic power or even a military power. And I think people forget we were actually allies with China during World War II before the communist revolution. And then, a few years ago, they broke away from kind of the old Soviet style command economy to say, no, we're going to have basically like a free market, dare I say, capitalist economy with still an authoritarian government. And I, for one, thought, well, that can't work, right? If you have a choice in the marketplace, then people will demand a choice in government. And I was completely wrong about it. And so here you have a billion consumers. I mean, a lot of them, a lot of the wealth is focused in places like Shanghai. You still have like a lot of rural poverty, and you still have a lot of what America looked like in the 19th century, a move to urban places. And those places are really kind of the engine of economic power. But yeah, like you're saying, economic power means a huge demand for resources, which is why you have a huge Chinese presence in Africa. And this is what the United States went through before. If you're going to be a global economic power, that means you need to have be global, military and political power as well to protect those overseas interests. And so that's why you see, incidents with the Philippines, incidents over some of the smaller islands that the ownership is disputed. And I think the last I heard is China is actually building a military base in Cuba, right, 90 miles away from the United States. Last time something like that happened was like the Cuban Missile crisis. So Chinese power inching up to America's back door. And, recently there's been a bit of a contraction in Chinese, economic power, but I probably won't last too long. So it's a brand new phenomenon. And you bet, we talked before about how Russia, China, North Korea today are kind of intentionally challenging the American view of the world and the way it's constructed alliances and agreements with other countries, United Nations, NATO. And so, North Korea is basically a failed state. Russia is a degraded economic power. But if you have an authoritarian power with 1 billion people matched with a booming economy, that perhaps does create an existential threat to the United States and Western democracies.
Yeah, and it seems that we will talk about China more often with all this different developments economically and socially and also globally. But when we were decided on our episodes, I wasn't thinking to talk about ancient China, but you said, no, we should do it. Is there any reason you want to talk about ancient China? Is there any really big importance of their history in the world history?
Yeah, I think so. I think so much of probably our education and education in this part of the world is focused on Western civilization. We've talked about Greece and Athens and the kind of the European empires and that influence. And I think it's really important to look at other sources of cultural influence, inventions, other empires, including in Africa as well. So China has been a kind of a driving cultural and innovative influence for thousands of years, which is something I think they've always been proud of, as perhaps not only until recently that pride in this thousands of years of history, unlike the United States, which is a couple hundred years old. Finally their traditions and inventions and culture has caught up with their economic and political power.
Yeah, nowadays, because our world is so much global and everybody's it's like a very world becomes like a small town, right? Small village. Although there are not that much transportation opportunities or for the knowledge transportation, and although China is so away from rest of the world, it is very surprising still they contributed a lot to the world civilization, right? Because of the wars, we know that because of the Crusades, right? Arabs learned so many things from China, and during the Crusades, Westerners they learned things from Arabs, and they took it to the West. But also, when we talk about China, one of the historical figures comes to people's mind because he is really well known, and our kids used to play some game in the pool, right? Oh, Marco Polo, right? When we talk about China, I know it is not that ancient China he was having a relationship, but I think it is important to talk about a little bit him. Like Marco Polo really created some kind of bridge between East and West. And for his times, he's really brave to travel all around. And very funny now, when authoritarian leaders do not like a specific person, they kind of blame them being a spy, right? And Marco Polo was also blamed as being a spy, and he spent, I think, some time in the prison, right? But again, he was really curious about Eastern culture, and he brought a lot back to the west. So what do you think about Marco Polo and his contributions being a bridge between east and west?
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is that China was, I think, Marco Polo helped popularize the idea that China had a lot of wealth in things like spices and dyes and jade, and those things traditionally traveled through the Arab areas that were controlled by the Ottoman Empire. And so that was one of the things that, like, Christopher Columbus and the other European explorers were looking for. They were looking to kind of break that monopoly on controlling the trade from the East that was held by the Ottoman Empire. And so that's why they started sending ships west to the Americas, looking for a passage through, especially like a northwest passage through the ice above Canada, to try to get to China. And so I think, again, these are things that maybe aren't clearly taught in schools these days. So the wealth of China, as it was known by Europeans hundreds of years ago, was one of the things that pushed, the Spanish and the Portuguese and the Dutch and the British to actually try to find dedicated, naval ways of tapping that wealth.
Yeah. So again, China is so far away, and but the name they are using for that trade road is very similar with their culture and their contribution, right? They call it like Silk
Road, yeah.
Road. So it is very obvious that they have huge domination on that trade road. Even I don't know who named it, but silk is another invention of China. And so today, again, we just talk about the current times, and we kind of going back to like backward in the history. But today mostly we talk about ancient China, but the way they shape the modern society. So some of the things maybe we will mention didn't happen during the ancient times, but it is also happened because of the Chinese culture. So I pick, to me, it is very interesting because Western part of the world start to use it really, really late. So I picked paper money.
Okay.
So Chinese, they were the first one using this, and very interestingly, they also invented paper. So not only paper money, but they invented paper too. And I want to talk about the money as a concept and its relationship with leadership. But for the first time, again, it is not in ancient time, but in the 7th century, China decided to use paper money as an exchange or medium. And it is very important. I don't know if you knew why they decided to do this, because they couldn't have enough copper to make money.
Oh, I see.
So that's why I think Tang dynasty, they decided, okay, so what we have more than the actual copper. So they decided to press and use paper money. But money as a concept, it is very interesting because in the history, when people using some exchange tools, especially for trade, they didn't think about using something nobody can see the value right away. Because in the human history, they start using like seashells as a tool to do trade. Then in ancient Egypt, they use wheat, right? Then they when they have this all like metal things, they switch it to copper, silver, then gold. But whatever you were using in to exchange, you can see the value, right? Oh, this is a one gold coin. I know what it represents. But when they moved, I mean, Chinese moved like paper money. It is very interesting for their times because you cannot see anything. It's just someone is writing.
Mhm.
And when you look at the Western history, the first time they use paper money or banknote in 1661.
Hmm.
And it is really later than the Chinese. But again, it's a very new concept for people. Oh, I cannot see the value, but I have to believe and trust banks
Mhm.
or other people who wrote that this piece of paper has this much value. So as a historian, I know it's like an economic socio historical concept, but how and why people convinced that
Hmm.
a piece of paper can have a value.
Well, so when you were talking, I was thinking about the American system and that the America was on the gold standard until actually really late. I think it was Nixon in the 70s that took the United States off the gold standard. And so that was the idea that if you have a $10 bill that's actually backed by
Mhm.
$10 in gold held by the United States government. And the reason it was like that for years was because that's what people thought created stability and kept inflation down, that you're not just having a printing press cranking out, $100 bills that's not backed by anything. And it was very controversial back, for a lot of people, because for some people, having a little bit of inflation is not a bad thing. So, for instance, like farmers, you're paying off a mortgage, but wouldn't it be nice if the value of your property went up
Mhm.
a little bit? Wouldn't it be nice if the value of the grain you're producing, or your livestock increases in value? So people were scared of the inflationary, possible effect of going off the gold standard. But that's where we've been for 50 years. And when this comes up in my American history classes, I always ask students, okay, today, I mean, this is what you're asking me today, what is the American dollar backed by? And people are like, oh, oil? I'm like, no, that's the whole point. It's not backed by anything. It's a piece of paper with ink on it and the drawing of people on it. So it is a really interesting phenomenon that people, it is, it's like the social compact. It's like we all agree that these things are worth money. What gives the American dollar value is the fact that the American economy is strong and stable. And so that's why it's the currency of exchange for, for all around the world. But it is really kind of a unique, interesting social compact that makes a lot of people
Mhm.
actually unhappy. If you do a Google search, there are people who want to go back to the gold standard. Right? They think that the world we live in is goofy. That there's these ink on paper represents value. And there have been conspiracy theories over the years about, oh, there's actually no gold in Fort Knox, and that's where they're keeping all the aliens that have landed in the United States. So even still today, even though I think most of us would accept that you can go to Starbucks with a $10 bill and you can buy maybe like one cup of coffee with that $10, a lot of people are still kind of questioning the idea. Well, no, it should be backed by something tangible. And for years in the United States, it was
Yeah.
gold.
And some people say that that's why it makes economy and economic system is so fragile
Hmm.
because everything is abstract. That's why the world is having all this economic crisis over and over, maybe every 5 years, every 10 years, because it is inevitable not to have an economic crisis because again there is nothing to supporting the system like a tangible, like
Hmm.
people say that, oh yeah, this countries are rich because they have this much gold I can see and count and
Right.
everything, but it is not. And other people try to create another exchange of currency, right, Bitcoin and
No, yeah.
everything. But whatever people try to do to change the system, somehow believing that a paper as you said with
Hmm.
ink is more uh, believable,
Yeah,
let me
real.
say,
Yeah.
then they're like, oh yeah, let's have another currency here, Bitcoin. But no, people lose so much money, and nobody is using it as a like a general currency of exchange. So somehow, thanks to China, ancient China, because they invented paper. Now we are talking about paper money. And why that's like related to leadership, because in our modern time, unfortunately, I will say this, the success of most of the leaders, how much they make their country or people richer. If they are business leaders, then their success is dependent on how much money they are making for their organization. So because we are so concentrated on success equals making money or increasing the wealth, it sometimes let us forget about what are the real things about leadership, right? Because economy defines most of the things people want to do. Then suddenly, I'm not saying for all the people, but most of the countries, for most of the people, money is the only aim to reach. And I don't know how it will be without paper money or the leadership really connected with the wealth. I don't know how it will be. But in the past, also leaders were judged if they are creating prosperity for their people. So I guess it has been like that all the time. But again, with the abstract money and paper money, with having no attached tangible value to it, it really makes everything blurry, I think. Like how we can say definitely this person is successful as a leader if we attach the success to something that we cannot even know if it has a real value or not.
Well, I mean, I think the other side of that is, I think a lot of successful leaders in business, they do have their success kind of gauged by other pieces of paper with writing on it that are backed with value, and that's like shares of stocks.
Yeah.
So if you think about the ultra rich, super rich people like Warren Buffett and Bill Gates and Elon Musk, right? They're not sitting on a mattress stuffed with $100 bills, right? Their wealth is based on shares of stock, and that for their companies that have a certain value. But that's also interesting too, because how do you ascribe value to that? It's not, this is the number of Teslas on the road, so that's how much money Elon Musk has. The market itself sets value often based on very intangible things and makes very kind of fickle ideas. So even though in that sense these successful leaders do have their wealth kind of backed by something seemingly more tangible, and that's stocks in their successful companies, but the value of those stocks is also kind of open to perception, right? It's not based on the buildings, that the value of the buildings, it's based on the perceived wealth and potential of that wealth to grow in those companies. So it's kind of the same.
Yeah, so people are very creative to create some kind of concepts and believe that they are very important, and then they just like beat themselves because this it's basically a story, right? We've created economic system and money and the success related to it. So I don't know, I chose something very arguable. I don't know what you picked. So what was your pick?
I chose something I think you'll find is pretty obvious, and that's the Chinese invention of gunpowder. So, I mean, if you're looking at human history and leadership and the history of the past 500 years or more, I mean, clearly the evolution or devolution of human civilization and society and wars and the emergence of new leaders and the fall of old leaders, has been really shaped by the introduction of gunpowder and new forms of fighting that's not based on, swords and dragons like on Game of Thrones anymore, or people shooting arrows at each other. Suddenly you now have, big armies can stand shoulder to shoulder, hundreds of yards apart, and whoever can, fire and keep firing and be the last one to keep the ground, right? That's who wins the battle. So, I mean, the way that gunpowder, which of course still exists and is still used in war, it's amazing how kind of consistent that is. To me, that was something that I would think, but you can say, clearly has shaped leadership over the past few hundred years.
Yeah, it is interesting because when Chinese invented gunpowder, it was for entertainment.
Oh, okay.
Reason, right? They use it for fireworks.
I see.
They didn't think to use it as a weapon, but thanks to Western people, they say, "Oh, wait a minute! Why are we wasting this great invention to have fun? Let's use it to kill other people," right? And it changed a lot in terms of leadership, which we will talk about medieval times in our next episode. But yeah, this gunpowder and using it as a weapon lasted feudal system, and it changed the history of West, and it affected the rest of the world. But I don't know who decided to use it as a weapon, and I don't know if that person, when they see what happened to the rest of the world, I don't know if they can dream.
So they're like Oppenheimer or something.
It's
they invent this, or Nobel, and the reason he invents dynamite and then founds the Nobel Prize.
What have I done? Right? It was just like to be to be like fun, and all these people are dying because of me. But we will never know that. It is important invention, and it is also so interesting how people use it for different things to do, right? So do you think when China saw that it's used as a weapon, they were like surprised? Because paper was used, same reason, right? Silk they created, it was used, same reason. Philosophy, right? It was used for reason. But gunpowder, it's really change its aim.
I don't know if they were surprised. I think probably as for much of the later centuries, China was trying to hold off the Western powers, right? They were the sick man of Asia, and the Western powers were carving up leaseholds so they could have a hand on the Chinese trade. So probably the Chinese themselves, and were being also kind of controlled by the opium trade that the European powers were also controlling. It helped control the Chinese population. So probably the Chinese were as happy as anyone else to get on board the gunpowder bandwagon. And recently, I watched I can't remember what streaming series it was, but I was watching the short series Shogun, which that was partly about introducing like cannon warfare into old Japan. And then, of course, if you've seen the Tom Cruise movie Last Samurai, which is about a Civil War veteran bringing guns and kind of modern gun warfare into a shogunate society where people still are riding on horseback, with armor and swords into battle. So if you're up against your enemy, whether it's fellow Chinese or another country, probably don't we live in a world, it's like you're saying, like Oppenheimer, nuclear weapons. You build one bomb, it's inevitable that everybody else is going to want to build a bomb. You can talk about the moral implications of that, but if the United States has it, then the Soviet Union's got to have it, and China's got to have it, and France and England and other countries have to have it. I think suddenly that kind of power that gunpowder represented, or today nuclear weapons represent, I think having that in your hand throws out all ideas of the moral ramifications
Yeah.
of it.
And also one thing I think hasn't changed since the beginning of the human history, is still people want to feel safe. And most of the countries, instead of, because we talk about prosperity, right, like creating more wealth for their people, leaders, unfortunately nowadays they don't choose to spend their country's budget on health or education or other things, but they prefer spending most of their budget to have more guns or more technological military advances, so they can be powerful against other countries. And that one, like, yeah, I am keeping you safe and I need to do it through having more guns. I think it hasn't changed since the beginning of the history.
Yeah, I mean, I think, in American politics, you also often say, you ask the voters, during an election cycle, do they want a mom or do they want a dad, right? If you're electing a mom, you want the mom to take care of you with healthcare and social programs and prescription drugs and, daycare, money for daycare. If you voting for dad, you want someone strong to keep you safe, and that often changes depending on what's going on in the world. So I think both elements are in there in leadership. And maybe it depends on the country, or maybe it depends on the era when that leader emerges.
Yeah. So again, like I said, I think one thing hasn't changed since the beginning of the human history: to feel safe. And either having money or guns so far make people to feel safe, and leaders use these two. One of them is more tangible than the other. I can say that, but they are both used to create successful leadership. So do you want to add anything?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yep.
Great. Okay, so we talk about invention of paper money and gunpowder today, and Chinese civilization contributed these two important inventions to rest of the world, and leaders have been using these two important invention to create their control over people, and also to create a successful leadership, which is creating safety environment for their people. So until next episode, stay safe. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.